Could you turn the mic on?
Yep. Cool. Can everybody out there in the audience hear us? All right. Before we jump into bill introductions, I did want to take a second to introduce, we do have a new representative, Representative Chuck Schmidt. Welcome. Would you like to just briefly share a little bit of background, where your district is, and anything you've wanted to share?
Sure. Thank you, Representative Hubert. I had the privilege of meeting you this summer, actually.
Yeah, I think at the baseball park.
Yeah.
That was a reception for something.
Right. My name is Chuck Schmidt. I'm representative from the 88th District, which is southeast Wichita. However, I've been a lifelong educator, and I was an administrator. When you're an educational administrator, you move around a little bit. So I actually was a teacher and coach in the Hayes area. I've taught and coached and administrated in both private schools and public schools. Then I was in the Topeka area at a couple of different places, and I finally ended up as superintendent of schools at Independence, Kansas. And then after I retired from that, I did the smartest thing I ever did in my life, and I went back to teaching. And I taught 6th grade social studies after retiring in the same district as superintendent, but then moved back to Wichita, and I've done some subbing there, although I stopped doing that with the pandemic, but I was subbing in those schools for a while. So I'm just happy to be on this committee, and I love this topic. So
you have a big shoes to fill, because I think you're taking Kathy with more spots.
Right, I understand she's very active and very knowledgeable.
We will miss her, but we're glad you're joining us. Real quick too, let's just go around the table with staff and just introduce yourself and what you're doing to help this committee succeed. We'll start with Deborah, my assistant, who is more than an assistant. We are partners in this mission, and she is great at what she does.
I just do the paperwork, but if you have any questions, just call me or email me, and I'm here for all of you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Jessa Farmer. I'm a senior research analyst with the Legislative Research Department. I'm here to answer any questions and help in any way that I can.
And also, if you don't mind me sharing, you will be adding to your family by the end of the session. So congratulations on your upcoming new child joining your family. So that's exciting. All right.
Jason Long, Senior Assistant Revisor with Office of Revisor of Statutes. Our office are the legal counsel for the legislature, so if you have any bill requests, amendment requests for this committee, or any other legal questions pertaining to the subject matter, feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email. Thank you.
And I'm glad to have you back. You were with this committee when I first started, and then Nick took over, now you're back, so we're glad to have you back.
I'm reminded of that line from The Godfather. I try to get out and they keep pulling me back in.
Yeah. We'll just go crisscross or whatever. Who wants to go first? Go ahead.
I'm Sean Marshall. I'm a legislative research fellow. I'm happy to help Jessa with any research you guys
Okay. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. My name is Irshad Radar. I am software engineer from AV team.
So you're doing the WebEx stuff?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Doing
My name is Jade Shaw, and I'm also helping with the broadcast team. I'm helping train him.
All right. Well, thank you for helping out, and we're glad you're here. In your folder, there's a list of everybody on the committee. Rules haven't changed. And again, one of the things on the rules, if you are on WebEx and we're voting on something, that's okay. You just have to be in your office so that we know that you're in the building. But other than that, everything else is the same. Let's see. Pretty much just other information for your perusal. Let's go ahead and jump into bill introductions. I know I had one person talk to me about a bill request, and so is Colton in? Yeah, Colton, if you could just share the RS number and briefly describe your bill. We'll introduce it without objection.
Yes. Hello. Thank you, Chairman Hubert. Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Colton Gibson, and I am representing the ACT. I'd like to briefly introduce 22 RS 2564. 22 RS 2564 is not really asking for any major changes. Really what we're looking for is just two simple red lines to the Student Data Privacy Act and the Student Online Personal Protection Act, with the intent of providing students better opportunities and outcomes. The first change to the SDEPA exempts college and career readiness assessments from requiring prior parental approval for students to share their scores with up to 4 colleges for free. The second change is to SOPA and just cleans up the existing definition of an operator for these assessments. These simple red lines will make it easier for students to send their scores out, easier for students to be recruited by colleges and universities, and provide a chance to improve outcomes. Lastly, I will say I do work for the ACT, but I'm not an expert. If you guys have any questions about this, please reach out and I'll be able to get an answer for you. Thank you.
Okay, committee, without objection, we will be introducing that as a committee bill. Is there anybody else on the committee or in the audience that has a bill introduction at this time? If you have an idea or are working on something, I would like for you to let me know, but get with Jason and he will help take whatever idea you have and get it into bill form and get it an RS number. The committee will be meeting again on Thursday, and there will be bill introductions again on Thursday. There's a good chance that Adam Thomas will be, my vice chair will be chairing. I get the chance to go over to the School Board Association building. I got appointed to be on the Graduation Requirements Task Force, and they're meeting in person here in Topeka on Thursday. So I know Adam is more than ready to step up and chair this committee in my absence. But make sure you don't forget to do bill introductions. Okay. All right. No other bill introductions? Okay. We're going to jump into, we have some presentations on some things that have been happening since last session through the summer, an interim presentation, and I'm going to let Jason start. This was something that was shared in committee that is good information that I wanted to be you aware of it, and I can talk a little bit more about that afterwards. But if you could go ahead and do that, and I wanted Jason for you to go ahead and do also that update on Senate Bill 40 after you finish this one. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. First, the chairman asked me to speak briefly on Article 6 of the Kansas Constitution. For those of you who may have tuned in to the Special Committee on Education this past interim that met November 30th and December 1st, there was a presentation from another reviser in our office on the same subject, and that memo has been distributed to the committee members for your reference. Under Article 6, there is a triumvirate, so to speak, of powers with respect to public education. The Constitution really delegates different areas and different authorities to 3 entities, one being the legislature, the second being the State Board of Education, and the third being the local boards of education of the individual school districts. And that's what this memo addresses, is how those constitutional duties and authorities work together, so to speak, for governance of public education. And when I say that in this context, it's the K through 12 or pre-K through 12 public education. This doesn't address higher education after high school graduation. And so starting first, there is the powers and duties of the legislature under the Kansas Constitution. We start at the heart of that, which is Article 2, Section 1, where all legislative power of the state is vested in the House of Representatives and the Senate, and there are all the powers under Article 2 for the passing of legislation. But then Article 6 also delegates some authority to the legislature. Specifically, it directs the legislature to provide for a state system of public education. And this falls under Article 6, Section 1 there in that delegation of authority. what the courts have said is that basically that power is supposed to harmonize with the power of the State Board of Education and its general supervision of public education. And so the real takeaway from that particular general power is just establishing a public school system, and that's the duty of the legislature. And then further on, Section 6 of Article 6 then directs the legislature to provide a suitable level of funding for that public school system. And so both establishment and funding are the directives to the legislature under Article 6. In between those two, you have the state board and the local boards of education. And under Section 2 of Article 6, there is a state board of education established with general supervision authority over public education in the state of Kansas. How far that power stretches has been the subject of many court cases and at least 2 attorney general opinions over the years. And there's no clear specific answer. I can't point you to a specific list, but we do have some guidance from the case law and the AG opinions as to what the State Board of Education is authorized to do under the Constitution. First and foremost, I will point out that this general supervisory authority has been considered by the courts to be self-executing, and what that means is the State Board of Education can take action and implement regulations and oversight of public education without a statute giving them the authority to do so. Now, the legislature can come alongside or come after the fact and introduce and pass legislation along with that same topic to provide a codification of regulations, but that legislation must harmonize with the action that the state board has taken, and the state board's action is binding and effective without any legislation coming from the legislature. As I said, it must be in harmony and not in degradation of the State Board of Education. I'll get into some case law a little bit later that touches more on that. I did want to just note that the third part of this is the local board of education. This is section 6 of our, section 6 of articles, section 5 of article 6. Local boards of education, they are granted authority of the daily operation of school districts, and the cases have held that this power is not self-executory, and so local school boards do need authority from statute in order to take actions in the operation of the school, local school district, and so they do often come up and will ask the legislature for authority to enter into these kind of contracts or to enter into those kinds of agreements or to conduct operations in such a way. Now, the obligations and duties of legislature and local school boards, again, must be harmonized and read with respect to their respective obligations. Oftentimes, the local board is seen as authority over who they hire and fire within the district, their curriculum that they use, while the state board may set the state standards for an academic subject matter. It is the local board that then goes out and selects the curriculum that would best meet those state standards. And so that's kind of an example of how you see those powers work together. There have been a few cases, notably the Peabody case in 1973 that held the State Board of Education's power was self-executing and did not require legislation, but it did find in that case that the legislation in question was to facilitate or assist the state board in what it was doing and not in derogation of the state board. And there's been some other cases touching on particularly NEA Fort Scott case in 1979, touching on that interaction between the state board and the local board. And again, pointing out that the local board's power was not self-executing and therefore it needed some statutory basis for that. Those cases, and a good summary of those is included in the memo if you have any questions. The AG opinions, I will note, just because they seem to touch on what are those areas that the State Board of Education has clear supervisory authority over. They note statewide accreditation of schools and school districts, certification of teachers teachers in schools. So when a teacher needs to go get certified, that's handled through the regulations of the state board. And matters such as graduation requirements are often seen as falling under that general supervisory authority of the State Board of Education. I will note there was a follow-up opinion to that one in 2019 from Attorney General Schmidt, in which the question was some changes to the licensure requirements for school district personnel for teaching certificates. And the AG opined that the legislation did not unduly interfere with the state board's performance of its general duty to certify teachers to be educators in the state. And so it was likely constitutional. Just an example of how the legislature can enact legislation that more harmonizes with the state board's larger duty under the Constitution. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Questions from the committee? Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I understand that the goal is that the legislature and the State Board of Ed are to act in harmony. But if harmony cannot be achieved at the end of the day, who ultimately has control?
That's subject to court interpretation then. And as you can see in the memo, there has been cases where the legislature, for example, I think in the Peabody case, the legislature passed some language regarding collective negotiations, collective bargaining negotiations between teachers and local school boards. And the state board had sued, arguing that that was unconstitutional because it usurped the state board's role in those negotiations under Article 6. And the court came in and interpreted Article 6 as saying, no, this is more going along with and facilitating the collective bargaining negotiations and not usurping the state board's role completely. And so while some questions are a little bit clearer than others in terms of whose authority it is, ultimately if the legislature passes something that the state board feels is overstepping its bounds and stepping into its general supervisory authority, it has the discretion to file a lawsuit and ask a court to interpret Article 6 and make a decision.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I know even last year with my civics bill, there was some discussion about that. I felt like that was probably one of the more clear-cut cases of the harmony because it's already in statute for the requirement for a civics class to be passed for graduation. Financial literacy that my vice chairman has had a bill that got put into that bill was a part of that discussion too. And I know there's been a lot of discussion on that issue about how the harmony can be achieved and that they are already working towards that same goal. So that's just a little bit of background in regards to those constitution issues. I thought it'd be a good refresher. I have pre-filed a bill dealing with computing science that even went back to a hearing that we had last March on things that the state board has worked with the legislature on. And when we get into that bill, we can have more discussion on that. But I just thought this would be good information as the committee starts over. It was discussed during the interim committee that was held in November, beginning of December. And I know Jess is going to give us more of an update on the rest of those topics. But without further questions, we'll move on to your Senate Bill 40 and remote learning and do you have a handout on that? I know I talked to you, no?
There was a memo distributed to the interim committee and I can make sure.
Okay. Yeah, get that to Deborah and we'll email that out to the committee, but.
I can do that.
Oh, it's, okay. So you probably already have that. Never mind. That's Deborah doing a good job. Okay, well, that's the interim. I'm talking about Senate Bill 40. Yeah, that's what he's going to email to you. No, that's all right. I just want to make sure everybody knows what's coming to them, what they already have.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm due to a little bit shorter notice on this topic. I did not get the memo sent to Deborah, but I will get that sent out, so that'll be coming to you via email, and you can see that. What the topic is, Senate Bill 40 was a bill that authorized school districts to conduct remote learning. And Senate bill, actually what the topic I think more addresses is House Bill 2134 from last year, which specifically addresses remote learning and how often and to what extent school districts can offer remote learning for students enrolled in the district if they need to close the actual physical buildings in the district for certain reasons. First, I'll just point out that remote learning is not virtual school. There's virtual school that students enroll in at the beginning of the semester, and they plan on attending, through the internet, online, through those programs with the school district. Remote learning is more of a method by which traditional in the classroom instruction can be provided through streaming services like Zoom meetings, WebEx meetings, and it can be done either totally through that, through some hybrid method where some students are in person and other students are out of person. All of those different methodologies are encompassed within the term remote learning. And so under House Bill 2134, in the conference committee last year, they adopted a new section that's now 72-5180 that basically limits school districts to no more than a total of 40 school term hours of remote learning in a year. There are, however, two exceptions to that. The district can apply for a temporary authorization for a particular student to attend more than 40 hours. It's based on a student's own circumstances and whether or not the student has like an illness or a condition or other extraordinary circumstance requiring them to stay in a remote learning environment beyond the 40 hours. And then there are exceptions for school-wide to go more than 40. They could apply to the State Board of Education for authority to go up to 240 hours due to a disaster that's hit the school district requiring closure of buildings. If they need to exceed that 240 hours of remote learning, they can then go to the State Board of Education again and seek a waiver of the requirements of law relating to remote learning limitations to go above that 240. So it's a two-step process to go up to 240 and then over 240 hours and during the school year of remote learning. The memo does define disaster as any state of disaster emergency declared by the governor or any other occurrence of widespread severe damage due to a natural man-made cause. We're talking about earthquakes, tornado, fire, wind, storm damage, epidemic, air contamination, any of those that would result in the closure of the school building could be used as a disaster exception to the 40-hour rule limit. I will note under the bill, there is a provision that if a school district exceeds the 40 hours of remote learning and does not get the exception approved by the state board to go above that, then its base aid per student is set at a flat $5,000 per student for, and there are no weightings applied for those students, and the state board is required to adjust the school district state aid accordingly. So there is that, encouraging school districts to go through the state board approval process. I'll send that memo out and be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jason. And I asked for this because I have been getting a few emails, talking to some people. I've seen things. I don't use Twitter, but occasionally I go on just to see what's being shared. And I've seen a lot of things out there that's stating that remote learning over 40 hours has just been shut down. And I just wanted to get this information out to you guys. So as you hear from your constituents and you see things, you can help to make those clarifications so that we're all on the same page that what's available, the options are out there. Even right now, there's a lot of things happening around the state, with sickness and school districts dealing with issues, and the tools that are available out there with above and beyond 40 hours. So help get that information out and help us do it the right way, the way it's set up in law, through school districts working with the state board to accommodate those needs as necessary. With that, I'll open it up for questions from the committee for Jason. Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding exemptions for particular students, how would this apply to special ed students that are required to be educated in the least restrictive environment that may have health issues that prevent them from returning to schools without any COVID mitigation practices in place?
So, I think in those cases, the student's health reasons would be the individual reason why the school district would extend remote learning for those students. In terms of what that remote learning would look like, that would largely be determined by the accommodations of the student's IEP or 504 plan that they have in place. The school district still has to abide by the provisions of the IEP in providing whatever education it is providing, whether that's in person or through remote learning.
So if the IEP determines the student's least restrictive environment is, say, in a mainstream classroom, would that classroom need to accommodate that student's health requirements?
It could mean that. I mean, one could debate whether or not inclusion in the mainstream classroom is physical location within the mainstream classroom or just participating in the mainstream classroom discussion via remote access on a live stream. There would be some discussion around that, but it would be up to the IEP team to determine what that education environment would look like for that student and therefore what accommodations the school district would need to make to accomplish that educational environment.
Thank you.
This might be a topic of further discussion. I think education budget, there might be possibility of looking at a bill in that arena. I haven't seen anything, but I know there's that possibility. And even for this committee, if somebody wanted to look at that issue as far as clarifications and things based on what was dealt with last year, come talk to me. Also, even with those of you that are on education budget with Christy Williams and her committee. So, Representative Schmidt.
Yes, sir. Mr. Long, you said there are, if a school district had gone over the 40 hours, they can appeal to the state board to increase, to continue to do remote learning. What's the process? To get?
Well, it would probably be an application process with the state board where the school district would complete a form to exceed 40 hours of remote education, listing the reasons why, would submit that to the State Board of Education for review and approval. As to the, as to the specifics on that form, or the specific review process the state board would take, I would have to defer to the state board representative as to what they've worked out for that.
Just for our information, currently Olathe schools are closed. 6 schools in Wichita are closed. The entire Wichita Diocese Catholic schools are closed. And I'm sure there are others. Those are just the ones I know about right now.
And help me remember, I know you've talked about this, but I just want to clarify it in my own mind too. There are some procedures in place for a school district to go over that 40 hours internally without going to the state board. Isn't that correct?
Well, to do that, there is an exception to go above the 40 hours for particular students based on individual student need. I mean, whether a school district could apply a rationale on that basis across all the students enrolled in the district to effectively go over the 40 hours without applying to the state board is probably questionable at this point under the statute and would need to be analyzed more closely.
Well, and that was the question even with why the law was passed in regards to not having everybody in remote learning, but for those students that are quarantined to give them the flexibility in those cases to do things internally without going to the state board.
So yes, on an individual student basis, the school district can extend the 40 hours on an individual student basis, but to do a full school district wide extension looks like it requires an appeal to the State Board of Education.
Well, that was one of the reasons why that law was passed, was to go for the entire district to remote learning because of the problems and challenges faced with remote learning and the damage that's been done in the last couple of years. So my editorialization on that. Further questions from the committee? Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So is there a provision for an individual school in a district to go over that 40-hour limit?
No, it's an individual student exception without having to go to the state board. If a school district wanted to close an entire school and have all the students enrolled in that school go remote learning, they would likely need to apply to the state board.
Okay, so not just for the entire school district, but if they had one particular school, for instance, that had a lot of positive cases, which is what we're dealing with right now, both staff and students. So they would go through the appeal process then?
It would most likely apply to the state board for approval for that.
Okay. Representative Byers.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. In connection with the individual student extension, was a process put in place that goes statewide, or is it up to each individual school district? And I'm asking because, for instance, in Wichita schools, it's anticipated nearly 10,000 students might be out with COVID here this week or next week. That's a lot of backbreaking legwork to try to work through that 40 hours per student. So is there a streamlined process, or is it still up to each individual district to determine how that works?
I think it's largely left to the individual districts to determine what policies they were going to implement as to when a student would qualify to go beyond the 40 hours and what the process would be to grant that exception and allow the student to go beyond 40 hours. Because as you said, all the school districts, some like Wichita, might need a much more streamlined process, whereas smaller rural districts could easily take it on a case-by-case basis. So I think it's left largely to the districts to determine their procedures.
Thank you.
And again, committee, that's something that is still always the ability to look at what's been done and to make tweaks to that. And that's what we're still looking at this part of the session, is how that can be with bill introductions looked at. So Representative Lynn Poskins. Mary Lynn Poskins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have had reports in districts that I represent where there are students in the classroom with no teacher, and looking at all of the options for covering those classes. If the teacher is remote in front of a classroom of students who are physically in the building, does that count as remote learning hours? So the students are in the classroom and the teacher is on WebEx or whatever remote learning situation is set up. Does that count as hours towards?
My initial answer would be probably yes, but I would want to caveat that with let me double check.
Okay, particularly since it wouldn't be district-wide, but spot in classrooms?
I believe the definition is based on any method that's involves some kind of remote communication between the educator and the students in the classroom. But I would need to double check on that.
That's just an idea as we go into further teacher absences and student absences and so forth. Thank you.
Representative.
So right now, we're under a disaster declaration, correct? And so since we are under a disaster declaration, if a school district needed to go beyond 40 hours, they could.
I don't think we're under disaster declaration for the schools, just for the hospitals. That's my understanding.
Well, the disaster definition is a state of disaster emergency declared by proclamation of the governor pursuant to 48-924. But I'll preface that with that would be a disaster for the exception in which they wanted to go beyond 40 and applied to the state board to go beyond 40. It doesn't exclude them from having to still apply to the state board to go beyond the 40 hours. Now, whether or not they could count this disaster declaration as a disaster for the school for those purposes, I would have to look into that a little bit closer.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, again, this is going to be shared from Jason to Deborah, who will share it with everybody so that you have that information that you can share with your constituents. And thank you, Jason. All right. Hey, and I had a question, but as you get ready to give your presentation, I know last week in education budget, there was some of this information and some other things that was available. And I talked to Christy about making that available to everybody on this committee. I didn't know if there's already some overlap between the two committees, but was anybody able to take advantage and join by WebEx last week? I hope that was again, I just thought it would be good without duplicating efforts to make you aware of that. If we could maybe share just a summary of that with the committee too, so that you have that information, I think, as far as the information that was shared in Christie's committee last Wednesday, I think it was. Some of that's what you just shared, and some of it's what she's going to be sharing. But again, we can double check to see if there's anything out there. But I would just encourage you that that information is available. Even now, I think it's, you can go and look at it, and it's on YouTube and you can watch it. So if you're bored and wanting to review some information, I would encourage you just to make sure, know that for committee members, it would be good information for you to look at. Okay. You already have in your inboxes the information from Jason's presentation. Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Deborah. All right, let's move on to next on the agenda. And this is the presentation on the special interim committee. And thank you, Jessa. You can, if you want to share from there, if you want to go up there, you can, whatever's easiest for you. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, members of the committee. I'm Jessa Farmer with the Legislative Research Department, and today I'm just going to provide a very brief, high-level overview of the Special Committee on Education. The Special Committee met for 2 days over the interim on November 30th and December 1st. The committee was charged with examining the issue of academic achievement in K-12 education by reviewing the following topics: funding increases approved under the Gannon decisions, legislation related to longitudinal reporting from 2015 to 2021, Department of Education rules and regulations updates in 2021 related to achievement, the State Board legislation priorities for the 2022 session, the Department of Education's priorities from its 50-stop success tour, achievement expectations and funding for at-risk students, and constitutional roles of the Legislature, State Board of Education, and local school boards. There is significant testimony provided at the meetings. All the written testimony has been posted to the committee's webpage. And I believe you've all been provided the agenda for the special committee. And so you can see all of the topics and all of the presentations. It was pretty significant during those 2 days. Topics included Article 6 of the Kansas Constitution, school finance, needs of at-risk students, skills for student success post-graduation, Department of Education rules and regulations changes, impact of COVID-19 on student achievement post-graduation, factors influencing student achievement, remote learning in quarantine, and virtual schools. The committee's recommendation can be found on page 17 of the committee report. Deborah has sent out that report to all of you. Committee members agreed by consensus to recommend to the 2022 legislature a goal of considering what elements are needed to ensure all students are reading at grade level by the end of grade 3. There was a minority report submitted, and that report begins on page 18 of the committee report. The minority report states it outlines specific concerns about some of the major conclusions advanced by the majority membership of the committee. Again, there was significant testimony discussion. All of that is provided on the committee website, and it's also an overview of all the testimony discussion is provided in that report, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I can.
Just questions from the committee? You're going to get off easy, it looks like. And again, even this is available to look at on YouTube if you're wanting to review any of the information that was discussed or presented back then. But I just felt like it would be good for the committee to be made aware of some of the topics and issues that were taking place in this interim. And so Jessica did a good brief overview. With that committee, I did not have anything else on the agenda. I can tell you that on Thursday, one of the things that I thought would be good to review and remind the committee are bills that we worked on last year and kicked out of committee. A lot of those things make it to the floor, but sometimes don't get above the line. They're still in play. And we as a committee, sometimes a bill might be sent to appropriations where it's kind of sets as a placeholder. I am very willing to talk with members of the committee on things that you might have worked on and are passionate about, on how we might continue to try to advance things that we felt worthy to kick out of this committee the first time. And so there'll be kind of a review of those things on Thursday, and I know that Representative Thomas will do a great job as we have that discussion. And again, as that happens and you see things that you feel like we can work on, let Representative Thomas know, let me know, and I'm very willing to try to do what I can to help facilitate anything. You know, it's frustrating as a chairman to see things that you work on not get above the line. And I know there's a lot of things out there, you know, with time constraints and everything else, especially last year with what we were dealing with. So I just felt like that was an important topic to review and look at as far as things that we might still consider looking at in the next few weeks before we get to turn around this year. So let me know about that. Let Adam know, and I know you'll have a great discussion on all those issues on Thursday. With that, committee,